A sultry summer night. Tourists and locals gather on and walk the narrow streets. Block to block, there is always a party atmosphere. This is New Orleans. A street vendor is serving up gumbo. Neon lights beckon. You can taste the city's flavor, a melting pot of French and Spanish history. Jazz music, so much a part of the city's fabric, its vibe, reverberates in the French Quarter clubs. New Orleans is now a decade removed from one of the worst natural disasters in the history of the United States. Hurricane Katrina, August 29, 2005. The day the music stopped.
Both directions completely gone.
1,500 people died here. 80% of the city was flooded when the levees protecting it collapsed.
Trying to get the attention of rescuers.
These days, at least in the French Quarter, you can barely tell it ever happened. Unless, like Jesse Schaefer, you lived through it, not once, but twice.
Everything happens for a reason. So,
but y'all have your lives.
yes, sir.
I mean, and isn't that the bottom line?
It's bottom line, you're right. This material stuff doesn't make a hill of beans.
Jesse Schaefer and his family lived in a neighborhood outside the city. There isn't much left now of his house or the development. Just boarded up windows, overgrown yards, and blown-in garage doors. When Katrina hit, 8 feet of water poured into the Schaefer's home and all the others. But instead of packing it up and calling it quits, the Schaefers rebuilt.
You live here and you don't want to move away. You don't want to lose all your friends. And that's what happens when you move away from places like this.
And not far from them, almost in their shadow, a new 25-foot-high concrete and steel flood wall went up so the water would not get in again. Problem was, like the gators in the river, the Schaefer's neighborhood wasn't inside the wall. And 7 years to the day after Katrina, it happened again. Hurricane Isaac. This time, the water wasn't just 8 feet deep. Show me where the water was for the two storms.
For Katrina, it was about up to the top of these these ceiling joists right here. And then for Katrina, that was for Katrina. And for Isaac, we had about 6 more feet. You can see the water line on the mirror that's up in the attic.
14 feet of water. The clock stopped at 5 minutes to 3 in the morning when the rising water covered it. But unlike Katrina, people here didn't evacuate for Isaac. It couldn't be as bad, they thought. So that night and part of the next day, Jesse Schaefer and his son saved people's lives.
A friend of mine had a boat on the other side of the wall, and we launched it, and we just started trying to get as many people as we could out of here.
So you rescued people?
Yes, sir.
How many?
Between me and my son, 120 people.
120 people? Where'd you pull them off of? Rooftops and?
Yeah, rooftops, out of windows. 2 guys were floating on a spare tire.
The Schaefers don't live here anymore. Virtually no one else does either. Of the 75 homes in the neighborhood, only 1 is lived in. While the Schaefers and their neighbors rebuilt after Katrina, some parts of New Orleans are still struggling to come back. An area called the Lower Ninth Ward, where so many people drowned, is still in disarray. Destroyed homes, empty lots are poignant reminders of the ongoing distress. Reminders that the recovery from Katrina is not complete. But it is being hastened by an infusion of new young blood.
So yeah, we are 2 young entrepreneurs, but we are mostly just 2 guys who work all the time and don't see our friends enough and eat a lot of pizza.
Sounds like the title of a book, 2 guys who work all the time.
2 guys who work all the time.
Michael Friedman is co-owner of Pizza Delicious, a slice for just $2.25. On Sunday afternoon, the place was packed. It usually is, says Friedman. Many of the customers are, like him, youthful. Friedman was attending Tulane University in the city when Katrina hit. He went home to New York for a time, but he couldn't get New Orleans out of his head. He came back, finished school, and then with his partner decided to open the restaurant.
I felt after Katrina very fortunate to be in the position that I was in. It was like I was just barely a new resident of the city, and I didn't have that much to lose, you know, but I saw so many people lose so much, and so to be able to help out in any way and provide a service in any way made me feel good.
Friedman is what the locals affectionately call a hipster, a wave of young entrepreneurs bringing vitality and ideas, revitalizing the city, feeding its appetite, its lust for life.
There are a lot of young people who are interested in doing stuff, and people who are really coming from all over the country to come down here because they feel like it's a spot where like anything can kind of happen, you know. It's just like opportunities, and that's I think always been part of the magic of New Orleans, is that it does kind of feel like anything could happen here, for better or worse.
Katrina was the worse. Today is certainly the better, much better. Katrina will always be part of the city's consciousness. The lost lives, the inconsolable sorrow, the mind-numbing destruction that spread out mile after mile along the U.S. Gulf Coast. This is Bay St. Louis, Mississippi. After Katrina, places like Bay St. Louis and Gulfport and Biloxi became known as the Forgotten Coast, because so much of the attention was going to New Orleans. In the days and months after Katrina, not being in the center of the media spotlight was just fine, says Mayor Les Fillingame.
But we didn't want anybody to see us bleeding. You know, we didn't want anybody to see us wounded. You know, we, by and large, are to the person very proud.
Katrina pummeled Bay St. Louis and all the Mississippi coast for 24 hours. The storm surge, up to 28 feet of water, pushed inland up to 12 miles, covering the landscape.
In a community like Bay St. Louis, the destruction was almost complete. You know, from public infrastructure to the individual homes. I think there was 50 homes out of the 4,500 in Bay St. Louis that were not considered destroyed.
And the cost to bring this city on the Gulf of Mexico back from the brink? $500 million in federal government money and private contributions, says the mayor. There are still the physical scars left behind, an overgrown slab of concrete where a house once stood. Swimming pool steps, that's it, just the steps, stick out above the ground. But by and large, Bay St. Louis is back. Neighborhoods rebuilt, restored, and alive. The massive Highway 90 bridge across the bay is open again. At a festival along the harbor, bags of ice are delivered. Today, it keeps drinks cold. A decade ago, you needed ice just to survive. Much of the credit for the recovery along the Mississippi coast has gone to what you might consider an unlikely source: casinos.
So bringing the influx of jobs that continued through, economic security that happened right afterward, bringing that money through really was a saving grace for this entire region. And that goes from the Florida Panhandle all the way into New Orleans.
Jeff Zaffron is vice president of the Hollywood Casino in Bay St. Louis, one of a dozen or so gaming facilities along the Mississippi coast.
Like I said, tens of thousands of individuals we employ, and we pump back hundreds and thousands and millions of dollars in tax revenue.
Like everyone else, the industry was dealt a bad hand from Katrina. At the Hollywood Casino, the storm took out the hotel. It's a parking lot now. 14 months later, it reopened a new hotel and refurbished casino. Prior to the hurricane, by law in Mississippi, casinos had to be built on water, floating on massive anchored barges. That's not a requirement any longer, but at Hollywood, the 50,000 square feet of gaming is still built to float. To look at it, you'd never know.
So you'll have your hotel, which will be land-based, and immediately adjacent, we'll have a series of barges underneath our casino floor. So everything that you see out here is actually physically on water.
The gaming business is bringing more jobs, more tourists, more money, but it too is still not quite all the way back from the storm.
So we've been able to really bring the economy back to perhaps not as high as it was right pre-Katrina, but darn close.
By and large, Katrina's behind us. You know, Katrina is completely in the rearview mirror, and most people in Bay St. Louis want it there. And most people don't like telling the story of Katrina. It was a bad chapter.
Now, a decade after the Katrina nightmare, the page is turned. Make no mistake, the book is not quite closed. Everyone will tell you there is work yet to be done. But New Orleans is New Orleans again. Mississippi is reborn. The storm has finally passed.